Hi there, it's July the 26th and we're continuing our journey through Paul's letter to the Romans, this amazing letter that's been called the Himalayas of the Scriptures. And we're looking at this third section from chapters 9 to 11 where Paul is dealing with the relationship of Israel to God and also the bringing in of the Gentiles. Remember here, we remind ourselves again that Paul is writing to a church in Rome that seems to have divided along Gentile and Jewish lines, with some Jews saying you have to be Jewish in order to receive Messiah, with some Gentiles saying you don't have to have anything to do with the Jews. In fact, the Jews are not important anymore. Paul is trying to harmonize them together. And we've just seen in the end of our reading, the last reading we did, that Paul says that this message is both for the Jews and the Gentiles alike, for Jews and non-Jews alike. He now goes on to back that up with scriptures at the beginning of this reading. So he quotes a scripture from Hosea, which says that the people who are not my people will be called my people. And this is referring to his reference, the fact that God is going to include the Gentiles. But then he also goes back to scriptures that promise that there will be a remnant of Israel saved, that God is not going to reject Israel. God is going to be faithful to his covenant. And he's going to leave them with seed. They're not going to become like Sodom and Gomorrah. They're going to be left with descendants. They're going to be included in on God's story of salvation. But what's happened here is that while Israel has been wanting to have this right standing with God, this relationship with God, they've been doing it on the basis of doing things, on the basis of focusing on the laws, of seeing the laws as being the important thing, rather than focusing on trusting, having faith. Remember, Paul has been making this point all the way through this letter, that having faith is the important thing, like Abraham had faith, that God recognized Abraham's faith and credited that to him as right standing with God. It's not about doing lots of things, it's not about keeping the laws. That doesn't get us into God's good books, as it were. But it's Messiah, it's Jesus Paul points to as the goal of the law. Now it's very important here because many translations of the New Testament have something like Christ is the end of the law for those who believe. Now the word end there is not a word finish, that's it over, because that seems to dismiss it. But actually the word in Greek is telos, and telos is a very important word because it means purpose, it means goal. So actually what Paul is saying here for Israel is that the goal is, the law is not a goal in itself. The law is not an end in itself. The law is to lead us. The Torah, the whole story of Israel, the whole story of God's salvation activity through the first 5 books of Moses, these are pointing to the salvation that is coming through Jesus, the Messiah. But the trouble is that Israel has missed this, and therefore they've stumbled against this stone. Paul quotes the psalm talks about putting a stone in Zion that will make people stumble, a rock that will trip people up. And he says this is what Jesus has become. He's become a stumbling block because he doesn't look like what Israel was originally finding. But Paul says at the beginning of chapter 10, the longing of my heart and the prayer of my heart is for them to come to salvation, because Messiah is this telos of the Torah. He is the goal of the whole story that God has been telling. And he actually says that what Moses is pointing to, what the scriptures are pointing to, what the prophets are pointing to, is a faith-based covenant. And that it's the one who puts his faith in God, not the one who tries to do things, not tries to go up to heaven to bring Messiah down or goes down to hell to bring him up into death from death. It's actually the one who trusts who will receive what God says. And he quotes that the words that say the word of faith is near you, it's in your mouth, it's not in your deeds, it's in your mouth. All you need to do, what the key thing to do, is to believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, and to confess that Jesus is Lord. These are the two things. This is like the bottom line for Paul, that you believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead, and that you confess him as Lord. And that's the basis. You don't have to add anything else to it. You don't have to put anything else with it, because he says everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be rescued. There's an amazing understanding here that Paul has of the basis going right back to Abraham on which the covenant is based. It's not based on our actions, and therefore we are held by it rather than holding on to it. And this is important for us to recognize, that this is God's grace. This is God's covenant bonded grace, that hesed word that comes right through the Hebrew scriptures again and again. This is because of what God has done, not because of what we do. And what we are called to do is to trust, is to say yes to God, is to live and give our whole lives over to Him. May we do that. May we confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord, and believe in our hearts that God raised Him from the dead, because that's the bottom line of being rescued. Have a very good July 26th.